Hi everyone. Thank you for tuning in this morning. And firstly, my apologies for not being able to do this in real time. However, I am in the chat and I'm watching this as I'm speaking. So if you have any questions, please just pop them in the chat or just email me afterwards. My name is Sonja A. I'm a doctor researcher at the University of Oslo in Norway. And firstly, I'd like to just thank the whole sort of Earth scholarship team at SGSAH and the British Council for letting me be here today, and also for putting up summer school and this event today. It's been a really interesting and inspiring spring for us and me as a visiting scholar. So I just wanted to say a big thank you. So to the topic at hand. For my PhD research, I worked on environmental policy and especially marine conservation and customary tenure management. I particularly looked at indigenous whaling practice. As I'm sort of just about done with my thesis, for my Earth scholarship, I actually decided to go into a different direction and think a bit about what I'd like to do in the future. I'm really interested in looking at how coastal communities are dealing with environmental change and the changing oceans. So the Earth scholarship for me was an opportunity to sort of workshop and develop my ideas for future research. So what I'm presenting today is really just a work in progress. It is beginnings of an idea. It is not a final product or findings or anything like that. So just keep that in mind. For my PhD, or during my PhD, I was lucky enough to be able to sort of do some short field work in northern Norway to observe how the government monitors the herring fishery there, which is the largest fishery Norway has, and its intersections with whale tourism in the north. And for Scotland, I was really interested in investigating if similar discussions about environmental change and marine-based livelihoods and economies were being had down south as they are in northern Norway. I also think Norway and Scotland as a comparative study sites are quite interesting, and the comparison is quite pertinent because they have a lot of similarities. Both rely heavily on offshore oil, both have enormous fisheries. I believe the Scottish share of the UK fisheries and aquaculture is like 70%, and Norway is always in the top 10 for both sort of capture fisheries and aquaculture production in the world. And more than just the statistics or economy, both nations or countries also boast this idea of like identities as coastal states and as northerners, quote unquote. And they're also places that are marketed to people as locations of great natural beauty, places where one can basically find wilderness. Since the 1990s, particularly, marine mammal-based tourism has also exploded worldwide, as well as in Norway and Scotland. I'm just going to use the word whale watching or dolphin tours from now on, because marine mammal-based tourism is quite a mouthful. But I understand that some of the industry also relies on other sort of things such as seabirds, seals, porpoises, all other kinds of sea life. For my field sites in Scotland, I really wanted to visit some key sites when it came to sort of marine tourism. I was based at the University of Aberdeen, which made it quite easy to travel. And I managed to go to 3 of these sites. One was in Inverness, where I did a dolphin tour or 2. Another one in Lossiemouth, where I did the same. And then I also visited the Scottish Dolphin Centre in Spey Bay in Moray, which is run by a charity, the Whale and Dolphin Conservation. But I was quite surprised to find that despite these sites being really interesting and the experience of being out on the water and hearing how local guides, for example, narrate the water and the area were really, really intriguing, my attention was constantly being pulled like back into Aberdeen. Which is where I will take you now, which is Greyhope Bay. As I mentioned earlier, or did I? Well, a lot of people in the course at least know that I studied in Aberdeen before. So Aberdeen was a familiar place to me, even though I left it nearly a decade ago. Since I had left it, the sort of sea side of it had changed quite a bit, and the sort of waterscape. If you stand on the beach boulevard, which is here at the top of the picture on the map, you can see these like loads of wind turbines jutting out from the water, which you couldn't see 10 years ago. And I also thought it seems like there's way less boats or ships that I was used to. And it turns out that that's true, because the city has actually developed and built a new harbour, which is slightly further out of the city centre. On the map here, you can see that the old harbour, I've marked it on as an orange dot, and it's the one just sort of slightly higher on the map. It's right at the city centre. And then the new harbour is just below it, and it's a bit further out. The old harbour still sort of works as a less commercial arm of the new harbour, though. And right between those orange dots is the Girdleness Peninsula. And since 2022, the yellow dot there marks the Greyhope Bay Centre, which is basically a cafe and a dolphin viewing platform. I'd also like to mention quickly that sort of just slightly further down on the peninsula, there's the historic site of Old Tory, which used to be one of the most important fishing communities in the 18th and 19th century for Aberdeen. But it was actually completely torn down, and the area was bought by the current dominant industry in Aberdeen, which is offshore oil and gas. But let's go back to Greyhope Bay. I visited this site multiple times during my stay, and I spotted the famous bottlenose dolphins every time except once, I believe. The bottlenose dolphins at Greyhope Bay are a resident pod, and they are also the world's most northern pod of bottlenose dolphins. As every tour operator and an info plaque will tell you, they're also unusually large, so that they can survive in these cold waters. But that also makes them quite easy to spot, and it makes them quite impressive if you encounter them on a boat or out on the water. Based on the observations by the Greyhope Bay staff, and as well as the sort of team of researchers at the University of Aberdeen in marine biology, there's this one spot just at the mouth of the old harbour, which is really popular among the dolphins. And you can sort of see on the photos, the people are looking out directly to that spot, because the cafe is located in a way that allows you to look out there. The dolphins often come to this spot to play and hunt, and it is believed that it's so popular because it's right at the mouth of the river, which means that salmon and trout that swim up and down the river also have to sort of pass through there. It also means that the dolphins have to, and they have really grown accustomed to, navigating some really busy traffic lanes. Prior to the new harbour being built, obviously, this area was even busier than it is today. The marine biologist team at Aberdeen has conducted some research here over the decades, and they have found that the boat traffic and noise pollution does impact dolphin behaviour, and that particularly small vessels that tend to have more erratic movement patterns and that tend to stay in the area longer are more bothersome to the dolphins than the larger ships that we can see here in the photo. But since the dolphins have stayed there for over 20 years now, pretty consistently, it seems clear that the boats are a nuisance that the dolphins are sort of willing to deal with to gain access to the fish. During my visit, I also kept thinking how weird it is that I'd never heard of this sort of spot or the dolphins when I lived in Aberdeen before. And I mean, I say this as a person who very nearly has a PhD in human whale relations. I feel like if the information was out there a decade ago, I would have been the target audience for it. And talking to some of the other visitors at the centre, it seemed like my experience was not one of a kind. One local visitor said that they'd never heard of the dolphins before, and they only found out when they went kayaking during the pandemic, when they needed to find a new way of spending time outside with family and friends. And another couple said that they didn't realize that you could see the dolphins so close to the shore, but moreover, they thought that this whole peninsula was privately owned and that it wasn't accessible to people, even though it is. Obviously, these are just anecdotal stories, and there's loads of locals who have who've lived by the coast for a long time, who work on the water, who travel by the sea loads, or who just know about the dolphins and don't really think about them twice. However, it does seem pretty clear that the development of organized activities and business activities around the dolphins is a new development. For example, one of the days I noticed there was a smaller private charter boat that was sort of chasing the dolphins, and I found out that that's a boat that's being used by the offshore industry to bring staff back and forth to the platforms, but it's also occasionally being used for private tours, dolphin tours in the harbour. And looking at the small boat sort of chasing the dolphins, it really chased it quite aggressively. It really made me think how this area of the sea is kind of an extension of what exists out on land. It's really busy. It's really quite heavily developed. And it feels like the dolphins are more like hapless pedestrians, just trying to sort of figure out where to go, rather than sort of being in their natural element. And this really sort of brings us to the crux of what really interests me. When out on the water, all these actors share one stage, but they play by different rules. Every actor, including the dolphin, is governed by different policies and regulations. So the cargo vessels have their own rules, the support infrastructure for offshore oil has their own rules. Even the private charter boat should be following the marine mammal protection regulations, though I don't think it was, based on my observation. And I've gone whale watching in other places where the rules are much more stricter and more sort of monitored. And it really seemed to me that the dolphins at Greyhope Bay operate under a completely different framework. They're protected, but they're also just another part of sort of everyday operations at the harbour. I'm also interested to sort of see what the invitation for all these people to come and watch these sort of multi-species traffic jams on a day-to-day basis does to these rules. Greyhope Bay Centre launched with the mission to encourage more community engagement and activities based on the coastal wildlife and the historic site of Tory. And I'm especially interested to hear what, if anything, would change the way the different actors interact or relate to the dolphins, now that the dolphins are becoming the main attraction in the area. I'm really hoping to conduct some longer term research here. I would like to talk more to the regular visitors at the bay, the people who run their day-to-day operations at the harbour, and also the people who conduct some of the private tours. I'm interested to really find out what emerges from Greyhope Bay. Increased understanding or appreciation for coastal ecosystems, conflicts between the different users, or is it stricter protective policies for dolphin and marine life? Or could there be sort of sense of reclaiming a space that was once lost? Yeah, so these are some of the questions that I'd really like to sort of answer in the future. And thanks to Earth, I'm working actively in collaboration with my mentors in Scotland and elsewhere to sort of come up with research that will put me in place to do that for a longer period of time. That's it for me today. Thank you so much for tuning in.